After Lorraine's dreams of seeing her friend alive get crushed, she learns everything that happened to Rentt. The poor researcher is almost completely in disbelief, but believes her friend, or whatever is left of him. She then wonders if Rentt even is the same person that he was as a human being. This question sends our undead friend into an existential crisis, as he realizes he never even considered it before. Is he human? The same human as Rentt Fina? Or is he just a monster with Rentt's memories? The answer is not clear to Rentt, and Lorraine smiles, relieved that at the very least, Rentt is behaving like his previous self. Setting the question aside, Lorraine asks about Rentt's plans for now, and the ghoul reveals he is still on the Sigma grind to become Mithril rank. Respect that dedication, dude. Rentt then requests Lorraine to help him buy supplies and get quests from the town, and she agrees, also offering him a place to stay in her house. Whoa, that's a nice friend. But to make it fair, Lorraine tells Rentt she'll be experimenting on him, potentially with parts cut off from his body. Okay, maybe not so nice after all. Later, Lorraine returns to Rentt with the money for his slime. Rentt gratefully accepts the money and leaves to see a blacksmith. On the way, Rentt's horrifying appearance attracts as much attention from the townsfolk as underage girls from gym teachers. But he manages to ignore them while he makes his way. At the blacksmith's, the receptionist is put off a bit but relaxes after seeing Rentt means no harm. He hands over his sword to her and requests a new one that can utilize mana, spirit, and divinity. The woman is surprised that Rentt can use all three powers and mentions only one person has visited her with the same ability. Gee, I wonder who that was. She agrees to take his order, but warns that the blacksmith, Clope, will require some time to prepare it. Rentt agrees and requests her to keep his strange identity a secret. He leaves after telling her to contact Lorraine for any upgrades. Back at Lorraine's house, she ponders what she knows about monsters that can evolve. She wonders why, unlike other ghouls, Rentt has his memories and doesn't lust for human flesh. She feels grateful, though, that he feels like the same Rentt she always knew. Thinking about the past, Lorraine remembers when they first met. After she had become the youngest to attain the title Great Doctor from her research, Lorraine was promoted to Silver Rank Adventurer. However, since she had no real exploration experience, the guild had assigned Rentt to help her on her journeys. Lorraine would come to know that Rentt was a rather experienced guy, and while he was rather weak, he knew how to navigate complex territories and was knowledgeable about monsters and herbs. Impressed, she asked Rentt to impart his knowledge to her, and thus their friendship had begun. Even nerds have game. Take notes, you losers. At present, Lorraine seems completely oblivious to the fact that the person she's feeling nostalgic about is a walking corpse. She sighs, remembering she needs Rentt to help her find some old letters she couldn't be bothered replying to. Back at the blacksmith's, Clope extends his hand to a reluctant Rentt to make their deal. Rentt seems self-conscious about his hand, but Clope doesn't care about his social anxiety and shakes it anyway. He hands Rentt a temporary sword, warning him that it can't utilize divinity. After Rentt leaves, the female clerk wonders why she's being so secretive, and Clope figures that he probably doesn't want any negative attention to fall on their shop. After Rentt returns home, he is greeted by his unofficial wife/mummy, Lorraine, and a home-cooked meal. While eating, Lorraine mentions that Rentt is certainly no ordinary ghoul, and he thinks all he can do for now is keep growing stronger and evolving. Rentt visits the labyrinth again. Inside, he encounters a struggling adventurer. After taking out his opponent, Rentt thinks about leaving the man be. However, the weak adventurer requests to join his party. Rentt notices a wound on his body, feeling strange, but decides to keep ignoring him. The adventurer keeps requesting Rentt to help him out, saying he has a restaurant under debt and started adventuring for livelihood. Displaying more kindness than most real people, Rentt decides to take the man under his wing. However, the man's bloody wound excites Rentt more than the mention of children to Discord mods. The thought of losing his mind over blood terrifies Rentt, who restrains himself and continues down the dungeon. The pair reaches an unexplored area, which Rentt allows the adventurer to later report to the town. Inside, Rentt sees a magic circle, which seems invisible to the adventurer. Ignoring Rentt's warnings, the man continues forth in the seemingly empty room and is teleported away. Instead of leaving the dumbass to die, Rentt displays selflessness once again and heads in to help him out. He is teleported into a new room with the injured adventurer, and the level 99 boss of all skull emojis looming over them. As the skeleton prepares to attack, creepy Rentt brandishes his sword with an ominous glint in his eyes. Rentt begins the battle and immediately realizes he's screwed. The skeleton, an undead, is completely unfazed by physical and magic attacks, thus requiring him to break Clope's sword to use divinity. After shooting a beam of divine energy, Rentt stuns the skeleton before jumping on his back and completely destroying its skull. Rentt then uses his divinity to heal the injured adventurer. The man wakes up and is shocked to see the boss defeated. Rentt offers him a giant magical crystal the skeleton dropped, which the man seems hesitant to accept. To make it fair, Rentt offers to make the man run his errands, revealing that his rotten body cannot be exposed to the town. Rentt then requests one more favor, eating at the man's restaurant, and the overwhelmed adventurer sheds tears of joy in the wholesome moment, accepting his trade. After leaving the labyrinth, the man takes Rentt to his restaurant. Rentt wonders what made it go out of business. Kitchen Nightmares level food, perhaps? The adventurer's wife comes out, wondering if the dark guy is mugging her husband. He reassures her that Rentt is actually a nice guy. The wife is skeptical, but believes her husband anyway. Rentt leaves after learning that the couple is called Loris and Isabel. Walking back home, he begins feeling strange urges again, feeling sad that he couldn't try them out on the kind chef. Saying Lorraine's name, he heads back home. Lorraine is happy to see him again and asks where the letters are. Rentt, however, seems unusually happy to hear her. Lorraine wonders if he's drunk when Rentt suddenly hugs her. Blushing madly, the down-bad Lorraine wants to get eaten out by Rentt, but finds out that he wants to literally eat her when he chomps down on her shoulder. Lorraine immediately shoves Rentt back and puts him to sleep with a powerful attack. Lorraine berates the unconscious Rentt, telling him that if he wanted to have her, he could have just asked her sober. "Goddamn, lady, chill! He's literally dead." After Rentt wakes up, he immediately apologizes to Lorraine, which she accepts. She asks if he remembers attacking her, and Rentt confirms that he was feeling ghoulish impulses. Lorraine nods, expecting some monster behavior, before Rentt asks to see her shoulder. When she reveals it, Rentt uses his divinity to heal her, which surprises Lorraine. Then it finally hits Rentt. Instead of looking like an eyeless ghoul, he now looks like he just freshly graduated from a concentration camp. Rentt is surprised that he now has eyes, teeth, and some control over his face mask. Lorraine tells Rentt that he has evolved from a ghoul into a ghast, a servant of vampires. Rentt is surprised since the fight with the skeleton didn't trigger his evolution, and wonders if Lorraine's blood caused it. She nods and tells him that his case of evolution is unique. Even Rentt's evolution from skeleton to ghoul instead of a stronger skeleton strikes Lorraine as strange. She mentions that perhaps Rentt is evolving into a form he desires, closer to humans. This would explain his becoming a ghast, a creature closer to vampires but look practically human. Rentt wonders why he didn't just directly evolve into a vampire, but Lorraine explains that vampires are strong creatures. Possibly, Rentt evolved into a lesser ghast, who are servants of vampires as a stepping stone towards a stronger evolution. Rentt then learns that to evolve into a vampire, he would need to fulfill more special requirements instead of just becoming stronger. He wonders if he continues evolving, he could one day turn back into a human, which Lorraine has no answer for. Suddenly, Lorraine realizes that she now has a reason to experiment on him, awakening her sadistic curiosity. Rentt agrees to help her, but Lorraine lets him rest for a bit after his traumatic day. The next day, Rentt wakes up and heads out for some exercise. He feels even stronger in his new body, and his zombie urges seem dormant for the time being. Rentt then goes out to return Clope's damaged sword before explaining that he lost it in an unforeseen circumstance. Clope is initially pissed off, but understands Rentt's situation before giving him a better sword to use. Rentt leaves, and in the town, he encounters Loris advertising his restaurant. The shadowy ghast quietly leaves the scene, seemingly satisfied with his friend's fate.